I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Flint to begin with, just so that you know who we are and kind of where we come from. My background is as an editor of various publications in the media technology, media tech industry. And the middle of last year, Neal and I met, and we both had an idea that there should be some kind of publication for ESG in the media space. There was no real place for media and entertainment professionals to be able to get together and share ideas about sustainability and ESG. There's a lot of great work being done in silos, people doing really, really cool stuff in advertising and really cool stuff in production and really cool stuff in distribution, but nobody was really talking to each other, and it was a lot of people reinventing the wheel, it seemed. So the Flint is designed to be a place where you can go get information about sustainability, decarbonization, building a better workplace, from script to distribution and beyond, to even merchandising and whatever is kind of beyond the content that you're making, libraries and archives even, because we wanted to have a place where the entire supply chain could talk to each other. So we've been operating since October. We're a little over 3 months in, and we've been really, really pleased with the response. There's been some great response in the industry, and we've got some great partners on board too. You can sign up for the Flint newsletter, weekly newsletter, which I think we'll be peppering the chat with during this to get you to sign up if you haven't signed up already. Also go to our website, which is theflint.media. And we also have a podcast. And then this Flint Forum, the first of these Flint Forums, you will be able to see on our YouTube channel in the next couple of weeks. Each month we'll be doing a different topic. As I said, we'll be doing next month production power and zero carbon power, and that transition to decarbonizing power in production. So we're going to be doing that. And you're all invited to these events to learn a lot, but also we want you to get involved and have questions, and to also use these as potential ways to meet people, to exchange ideas, to network. We wanted to kick off this first Flint Forum with the subject of sustainability and cloud, because cloud is a huge part of what underpins most everything that we're doing in the media industry now. And we wanted to take a look at the cloud and see how sustainable the cloud is. We all suppose that it must be more sustainable than what we're doing. It must be more sustainable than doing things on premises, right? Must be. We figure it is, but we actually don't have the good numbers that we need to prove it, and to really sort of show progress and measure progress. So we're going to be able to get into that conversation today and look at some of the problems that we have with cloud, some of the great things that cloud allows us to do, and also, what maybe compose a list of things that we need from cloud services in order to for us to be more sustainable in our businesses and to get the industry to zero carbon and to be more sustainable. So I'm going to turn it over to our three guests, François Polarczyk, Dom Robinson, and Mike Ward, and ask them to just introduce themselves and also tell us about what your companies do. So François, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Neal. So my name is François Polarczyk. I am Sustainability Director at Accedo. What we do at Accedo is we are a video solution provider working with broadcasters, operators, and sports organizations. And my focus really in the company for the last couple of years now has been to kickstart our ESG journey, which I think was quite important to understand anything around sustainability in media and entertainment. And for the last 10, 12 months now, been focusing on working with our customers and also industry friends on understanding what is the definition of sustainability in media and help them reach their sustainability goals, essentially.
Great, thanks. Dom?
Yeah, hi. I'm a practitioner of about 30 years in the streaming space, specialized in live CDNs and that sort of thing. But in the last 4 years or so, I started up an association called Greening Your Streaming, which is got a lot of involvement from across the industry, and we are a members organisation that are actively trying to engineer more efficient systems, and everything that involves.
Great, Mike.
Hi, yep, I'm Mike Ward. I head up marketing for a web-based graphics platform called Singular.live. We are, all of us, sort of, well, many decades in the live production industry on traditional graphics platforms, and we launched Singular in 2019, having kind of realized that there had to be more modern ways of doing graphics that didn't involve buying big bits of hardware and having them sat in big rack rooms just to put a logo on someone's channel on their video. And kind of with that sort of, I suppose, that background and that intention, we sort of, I wouldn't say stumbled, but we've certainly kind of entered into this world of sustainability where we quickly realized that there was an awful lot more that we needed to learn. And so I think I approached this very much not as an expert, although you kindly introduced me as an expert, but someone who is actively interested in trying to learn more and understand it a lot more, because I think it is, well, to say it's incredibly important is an understatement, but I think it's something that there are a lot of people, there are a lot of companies who are genuinely interested in trying to make a difference and make things better. And so I think collaborating, finding those people, learning from them and helping each other is really, that's where we're at. We're just trying to be one small part of the puzzle to make the overall noise a bit bigger.
Thanks, great. And then actually that's a great sort of jumping off point, Mike, that you mentioned there, sort of talking about your customers. What is your impression? I'm going to ask all three of you guys this. What is your impression based on your discussions with customers or with associates or in Grading and Streaming, the Grading and Streaming members? How important the sustainability of cloud is? Of course, it, outsourcing miracle of the 21st century. We're like, oh my gosh, all this like this stuff, I don't have to do this on my on premises anymore. I'll throw it over to the cloud, and they can do stuff that I didn't even know how to do. And so at some point, I think we've started to go, oh well, what's going on over there, and how sustainable is that? Should I be thinking about that? Are people thinking that way? Is cloud enter into their sustainability conversation, in the positive and the negative? I mean, obviously, there's clear sustainability benefits to being able to do stuff in the cloud. But are your customers thinking about stuff in that way? Maybe Mike,
so
do you want to
being very candid, and this may completely derail this whole conversation, but that we've got a very wide range of customers, because our platform is web-based. Anyone can sign up and use it. So we have schools who are signed up for our Singular for Good program that gives them free accounts, through to large federations and networks who use it not for their primary production, but who will be using it for supplementary stuff. And so the importance of sustainability in their choices makes a very, very big difference depending on who you're asking. I think any company, any production company, any federation, any network will tell you that sustainability is very important to them, but what they actually put into practice is not necessarily always what they say, and what they they don't all practice what they preach. And I think for us, it's probably 3 years ago now, we did the sustainability project with the IBC Innovation Accelerator, where we got together Sky, BT, the BBC, and the Premier League, and all tried to do a production that was based on, okay, if we did a live production now of some Premier League content, how well could we do it, and what would that look like, and how much kind of benefit would that be environmentally compared to the traditional way that they were doing it? And it was amazing that we had these big companies on board, and a lot of those companies are very committed to improving their sustainability, absolutely. So I'm not calling them out and saying they're not, but I think what it really unearthed is that everyone's at different stages of their journey. No matter what they say, no matter the commitments they make, everyone's still learning. And as soon as you start entering into any kind of conversation or discussion or analysis of how sustainable your productions are or your infrastructure is, you're actually really only just scratching the surface, because you will start having conversations with people that make you very quickly realize you know very little about what you're talking about, and you're someone who's interested and actively trying to learn more and do more. So then you compare that to to clients, customers who are saying, yes, we need to be more sustainable, and they'll be okay with the fact that, well, that as long as I can say we're sustainable, as long as I've covered everything with carbon credits or the stuff François shared with us about RECs and things, then I'm okay. So I don't want to dig too deep, because I'll actually find out that we're in such a mess and we're so far away from where we need to be. I'd rather not look there. So let's just tick a box. And so that's a really long and vague answer that says it's completely different depending on who you're asking, and what they're trying to say, really.
That's right. Well, I think we can get into it, because that's like some of the work that Dom is doing. This, as somebody was describing the other day, as this big plate of spaghetti that we've got to sort of sort out. That as you're throwing things over to the cloud, hoping it's all going to work out. It's not going away. Eventually, you have to sort of look at what it's doing. François, what about you? Are you? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mike. Were you?
No, I was just going to say that I can say quite emphatically, and I think everyone would agree with this, that one of the main contributors to a kind of an environmental impact of a live production is transport and travel. So if you have the means to send less kit, less people to the venue that you have to produce stuff, you will be making things better environmentally. But that's one kind of aspect, because there's the carbon side of it, there's the energy side of it, there's the water usage. There are so many aspects to sustainability that go beyond just, oh, are you using hardware or are you using a cloud-based solution?
Mm-hmm. And there it's very hard because it's so complex, I think very hard for one person definitely, or even a group of people, to kind of try to keep juggling all those balls in the air at the same time and kind of think all those things through. François, can you talk us through Accedo a little bit, and kind of what your customers are thinking?
I think there's still a big education part to be done. I mean, even from our side, it took us a few years to understand what this is all really about. And going back to me starting with the ESG parts, it was really important to understand the importance of scopes and responsibilities when it comes to energy consumption and carbon emissions. If today you're looking at the three big ones, Azure, GCP, and AWS. If you're someone that doesn't really know anything about sustainability, energy consumption, and CO2 emission, you'll see that GCP has been carbon neutral for a longer time than any other, and it ticks more boxes than any other. What does that mean? Is that a good thing to be carbon neutral? Well, I mean, I think it's a bit of a yes and no, right? Because today being carbon neutral is not something that we want to praise for everyone. It just means that you might be consuming, kind of like bad energy or carbon intensive energy, and you're just offsetting it with carbon credits or any kind of certificates. So is that good? We don't really know. And the same thing with AWS, claiming to be using carbon energy across all operation by 2025. This is going to be the same kind of scenario, right? So this is just the tip of the iceberg. Then what happens underneath? The cloud, I mean, yes, of course, it's something that everyone is externalizing. I think there's a lot of benefits to it, given that obviously you have shared resources, optimized resources. The scalability is good. It also means that perhaps our customers and ourselves, we don't really look at what we're spending. We're trying to do that internally with our own platform, Accedo One, that we're essentially managing all traffic and all AWS instances for all our customers. Perhaps these customers are not super receptive to it yet because they're tier 2 or tier 3 customers. They're a bit smaller, but we're trying to engage with them. Obviously, this is something we're looking at not only from a cost perspective or performance perspective, but also now from a perspective of how efficient it is from a sustainability perspective. So that's quite interesting. And I think even more interesting is the elasticity that the cloud brings rather than scalability. These resources, these compute services that we're running, on AWS or any other, they're being shared and optimized for all different servers. Whereas the scalability, I'm not even sure this is something that can be seen as something positive sometimes, right? Unless it can scale out as well rather than scaling up.
That's Dom, do you want to tell us about the kind of the greening of streaming membership, and also what your work has been like in terms of, because that is a big part of your work. You do video distribution and what the sustainability of, you know, you're trying to improve the sustainability of video distribution, but cloud now is a huge part of that.
Yeah, I've written almost 2 pages of notes while Mike and François were talking. I think it was a really big question and an important question. I sort of framed it as how important is sustainability of the cloud to industry, to our members in particular. I think going back maybe 3 years, films started to appear flying over data centers, and initially I think a lot of that was fed into the conscious around crypto and mining, but very quickly that was about the time it became apparent to me, thinking about the enormous quantities of compute that our industry uses and the infrastructure used in CDNs and in what we call clouds and private data centers and so on and so forth. I was thinking pretty soon somebody's going to count the GPUs we're using, and it's going to dwarf the amount of GPUs that are being used in the crypto market. And then, you know, it's easy to fly a drone over a data center and go, look, that's really bad, but it's very difficult to fly one over a CDN or a telco or an ISP and say that that's bad. But it's actually, you know, IEA numbers, slightly more goes into that environment, into the telco and CDN and distribution network than goes into the data centers. So we clearly have an energy demand, and also these things are quite big infrastructures using rare earth materials and carbon aside. I try not to talk about carbon because we get very myopic about carbon, and we don't talk about it in greening and streaming much. We talk about operational energy. There's, I think, a lot of what Mike's talked about, the transition of production models can make huge changes, and those are into a more homogeneous environment, and you can get systemic efficiencies both economically and through energy and all sorts of things in that big one step of behavioral change. But once you're there, you can't just go, that's done. Actually, what's going on in the telco network, what's going on in video compression, in all of these elements that really touch every element of what the artist's creative output becomes when you deliver it to the end user. I think that those systems can have huge bearing, and that's the scope, if you like, of what we're very focused on. We've discovered all sorts of counterintuitive things as we've set about looking into a lot of the measurements and things, and you know, we're very cautious about exploring storage at the moment because it's one of the 3 legs of the data center alongside compute and network. There's an asynchronicity to it in media as well, which makes it harder to test. So we sort of step back from storage a little bit, and we know other groups like the Infrastructure Masons, and there's a couple of other groups that are starting up who are a bit more focused on storage elements. We will come back to that, but we're more focused on lining everything up to get a huge amount of data through networks, and that whether that has any impact on energy, and it's very difficult to say. What we can say is not sending data saves very little energy, which is a counterintuitive sounding statement.
Can you talk a bit more about why that's not, so we don't want this to get sort of too deeply technical, but that I think
at a big level, and what we know from network environments and CDNs now is that that infrastructure is not elastic in as much as it's not scaled in response to the World Cup happening. It's scaled for the anticipated peak of traffic combined in about 5 or 10 years' time before you have to refresh all the kit. So that's a huge baseload of energy. And actually the traffic, if you like, is just a modulation within that. So actually sending data doesn't specifically change the energy in a network. Creating data in a compute center, in a data center does. Decoding it in the consumer device does. But the network that's provisioned, you don't see energy fluctuating in any parallel way with traffic. So
that's just sort of sitting there, just humming away all the time. Just
it's like the train network. The lines are powered, whether you've got trains going on them or not, and that's a different story. But I think that just bringing that back to hyperscalers and the more the sort of data center centric compute environment, One of the things that's complicated is a confusion between attributional life cycle and consequential life cycle. And I'm on a bit of a hobby horse about this at the moment. But most carbon calculators and most models which evaluate the carbon intensity of an application being run within a data center use an attributional model, and they say how much of the energy you can feel responsible for. But if you let go of that energy demand and reduce your infrastructure footprint, it doesn't change the actual energy that's being used, it changes the attribution of it to you. And that's very, very important to understand, and it's become very conflated in carbon calculators, carbon accounting, and all these carbon-centric models. And by taking a decision to not look at carbon and look at energy, and then come back to the carbon, we're seeing a big discrepancy in how those models are, or more of a conflation in how those models have been used. So there is a sense that if you attribute less energy to yourself, you've consequentially saved the planet by reducing the energy of the overall system. And that's not necessarily the case. And I would caution when looking at moving your workloads to hyperscalers in thinking that you are immediately reducing energy demand on the overall grid.
But you can, so the idea is that I'm sending something to hyperscaler to the cloud because, you know, if I'm doing it for sustainability reasons, because that is going to, that'll consume less power than if I do it here on premises.
Yeah,
that
so you might
sort
have,
of clear.
Yes, a classic example, let's keep a simple live workflow. Someone's got an encoder in their production facility or in their VVAN or wherever it is, and they send a stream to their streaming origin. And maybe that streaming origin's running in it used to run in a data center and be a server, maybe 2 data centers because you wanted some redundancy. Now what happens is you ape that model into the cloud. The cloud wants to offer you 4 nines on the availability of that computer. So it spins up a spare, and then it sees you spin up a second computer for your own redundancy, and then it spins up a spare, and you end up with 4 computers running. And actually, they're not really running. They were already running. They're just allocated to you. So it's extremely confusing to sit there and go, I use this computer for this much time, therefore my carbon footprint was X, because it doesn't work like that. So it doesn't really correlate like that.
And that brings that sort of, and I know that you can get into more about all the spaghetti about, you know, what, as you said, and some of the sort of paradoxes about networks and distribution and cloud. And that brings up, you know, what do I, as a business, do if I really want to be more sustainable and I'm trying to lower my entire carbon footprint, and I'm so having to look at my scope 3, and I want that scope 3 to get as close to 0 as possible, especially if it's like emissions, because I know that my big job, if I'm going to survive the 21st century, is to get down emissions, or to get to 0 carbon and to decarbonize. But then, you know, looking at the cloud, it's there's whole, first of all, the barrier of just getting good information out of there in the first place, but then all these other things, Dom, that you're talking about, and the sort of multiple hurdles I have to get to. What as a business do I do if I want to be sure that my cloud use is to kind of getting the industry's overall carbon footprint going down instead of up? What do I do? Mike, answer that question, please. That impossible question.
It is impossible, because actually all you can do is educate yourself. And look, what Dom's just explained is a perfect example of what I said at the start of this, which is that by having these conversations, you learn more, because I hadn't considered what he'd said, but it makes absolute sense. And it's obviously, you know, that's obviously what it is. But when we use the cloud, we all think, oh, that's fine, because in a traditional graphic sense, and excuse me for talking graphics, but that's you know what we do. So in a traditional sense, if you're in a sort of typical production control room, you don't switch the graphics engines off. You leave them on, even when you're not using them. All right. So one of the things is, oh, great, if I'm using a cloud service, well, when I've finished using it, I log out and that's it. You know, and that's fine. I'm guilt-free because I'm not using the energy, but that computer's still running, to Dom's point. So yeah, okay, I'm mitigating my personal liability, my personal usage, but I'm not actually really being a sustainable solution, because a more sustainable solution would be someone turns that computer off when it's not being used, and that isn't what's happening. That's not the reality. So let alone the fact that there are spares, there's redundancy being spun up, and then additional stuff. And so I think it all comes back to education again, and just understanding the reality of what's happening. And I think that's why the greening of streaming stuff is so important, because they do focus on the data, and not kind of like, okay, carbon's the thing, so we've got to reduce carbon. Well, start with energy use, because energy use is what really drives everything. And the more energy you use, the more external things will be impacted by that, like carbon, for example. So again, it's just about knowledge and understanding the reality of what cloud is, what everything else is, how it all fits together, and where the impacts are. Because, you know, when we talk about what we as an industry are doing in terms of creating and distributing content, that is a really, really big part to play. But then the very tail end of that is people and their devices. So whether that's the TV and people leaving their TVs on standby, all of that stuff has a massive impact as well. So it isn't enough to only address one small part of it. You've got to try and really understand it all, and collaborate, because that's the only way you're going to achieve what you want to do, Neal, which is, you know, to make your life more sustainable and leave less of an impact on the planet.
If only there were a publication that would do all that. So it was our
Exactly,
little
right?
shameless plug there. But Francois, what about you in terms of talking to your customers, and like, you know, if a customer comes to you and you're providing your services, and they're like, I really want to know this stuff, you know, what do I do?
Well, I can tell you what we do.
We have to do kind of go, oh, but yeah, what do you tell them?
We're a customer ourselves of a major cloud organization, right? So I can tell you my perspective on that, and obviously there's a lot that is being done, you know, with our system cloud architects and working with AWS and others to make sure that we can improve things. And I'm definitely not technical enough to talk about that, but surely there are things being done. But from a sustainability perspective, and what I know is that transparency is quite key, and it's something that I think we need to talk about when we think about the different cloud reporting tools or carbon reporting tools that we have. You know, they're very much centered around carbon. The one we get from AWS, it's really what is the market value of the energy for a certain period of time. Whereas they could look at the location-based approach, which is much more accurate, and then tell us exactly which type of energy is being used for services, right? But only Google is doing that at the moment. AWS is not. And on the other hand, we don't have the scope 3 emissions in the AWS report either, and very few are doing that. And Google is trying to get some of them in there, but we don't have that. So all the embodied emissions, all the water being used, we don't really have that either, right? So we just have to use the best guess and the most cautious approach, because that's what you do in carbon accounting. You can't really just try to sweep everything under the rug. Like, you know, they're all saying that they're going to be carbon neutral, or they already are, but in essence, there's something that should be known as well, and that I've learned quite recently, and I think is very true, is that saying that a service or product or a company is carbon neutral is a fallacy. This cannot happen. The only thing that can be carbon neutral is the planet, right? So you need to look at all the inflows and the outflows, and all of that works together. But obviously we don't have a carbon accounting tool for Earth today, and that doesn't work. We're way too complex. Perhaps AI will solve that. But saying that, you know, GCP or Azure or any other would be carbon neutral is just really saying, yeah, we've solved the problem. But really what we should be doing is, you know, make sure that Dom does his job with greening of streaming and the others, and really looking at the nitty-gritty of things on how to reduce energy consumption, rather than trying to solve this big CO2 problem. That is really something that is, you can't say you do A minus B and then you're going to get C or zero. That's not going to work like that. So really this transparency and this most cautious approach, I would love to see that, and getting more data, so then we can decide and then follow the greenhouse gas protocol, follow what, you know, the SBTi is telling us to do, but not just having everyone making their own sauce and telling us what they think is best and what is going to make us go with them or another one, right? We just want more transparency. We're not at a stage of we need to prioritize one cloud provider compared to the other. We really need to have this more transparency today, I think.
Yeah, there is that with that sort of carbon neutral model, and that idea that I've created some carbon and then I've offset it. that is very much like, we did it, I'm fine, you know, it's all good. Don't look here, we sorted it out. which
I think it should never be used for marketing, right?
Yeah.
It should never be used for marketing, right? Because it's just saying that they've solved the problem, and that's not the case, right? It's important. Offsets are important, and it's important. It's something actually we've started looking into with Accedo. We're not talking about it, but it's important to start funding these projects, this high-cost project. But I can tell you that whatever, you know, Netflix or all the others are doing, they're not funding only pure high-cost carbon direct capture projects. They're funding cheaper projects, right? Because it'd be impossible to offset all these thousands of tons of CO2 for really high cost projects. So that's what they start looking into. But they should always be, and I think AWS is doing that. Amazon is doing that. That they're actually, Amazon is the biggest purchaser of clean energy for the last 4 years. But they've always made a commitment that they would purchase less energy than they are creating, because they've got solar farms, they've got wind farms. I think that's quite important, and their goal eventually is to have, you know, to go to zero when it comes to the carbon offsets and the credits and the certificates, and then have, you know, plethora of solar and wind farms, which I think is commendable and is good in that aspect.
What about some of the other cloud providers or data center providers? There's this kind of big, like 5, I guess. What is like Google, AWS? What is the other one? Azure, and then Alibaba,
IBM,
and Tencent.
Oracle,
IBM. I guess that's a question too. We could get into like Alibaba and, you know, how sustainable are Chinese data centers, but that might be a bridge too far. But are there any benefits of one over the other? I mean, not necessarily sort of compare, but compare, you know, say Google and AWS, but sort of a smaller cloud company or a smaller data center company versus a hyperscaler? Or is there anything, if I'm looking at hosting services, that I should look at there, or is it just all much of a muchness?
So I actually have a question, maybe Dom can answer that. Just looking at, you know, the hyperscalers, yes, you see that you move from on-prem to the hyperscalers in the cloud. I've learned a lot about edge computing. I saw this brilliant article about those swimming pools being heated with local data centers.
Awesome.
That's great. So is there an in-between? Should we favor, you know, like go local and favor, you know, smaller cloud providers that could, you know, power and serve different areas, different geographical areas where we have a bit more control, where we kind of like have this better transparency for very specific applications? I mean, we know that in streaming there are some companies that are really purely focusing on video, and they get, you know, way better compute power and output. So is there an in between? Is there an alternative to that, or something complementary to the big ones?
100%. I think there's a sort of use case specific data center models sort of emerging, you know, ones with lots of ASICs for doing video processing, or lots of compute capacity but optimized for AI training or whatever it is. And I think those applications can be hived off into sort of more enterprise class SaaS model, enterprise class infrastructure models and so on. And I think those will continue. I don't think the edge necessarily is an edge near you as a sort of classic CDN edge. I think that's still a bit of a picture. Everyone's looking for applications that are near the mass market for that. I think the edge will actually be more, it's out on the edge of the periphery because the power was greener or cheaper. So I think the idea of moving applications to more efficient energy makes a lot of sense when you're not necessarily moving them in a classic sense of edge computing out to the masts or something so that many people can get access to it. It's a different model. I think it's going just to your question, Neal, what can you do? Sort of overarching question here. I think Mike hit the nail on the head. Turn it off if you're not using it. If you know you can turn it off, that is the only thing we know we can do at the moment. It's so complicated. There was a whole category of discussion about infrastructure deferral. So the less you use of the cloud, well, that's better. They don't have to build more cloud and so on. But actually what happens is as you build more cloud, the cloud becomes more energy efficient. So then you can deprecate the old cloud more rapidly, and you end up with a more condensed, more energy efficient cloud over time. So even infrastructure deferral gets really complicated. The same's true with telecoms. You can, as you get sort of generative leaps in network, sometimes 4G to 5G, you might have a 6 times power increase and a 10 times capacity increase or something. And actually, no one's coming to fill that capacity, so it's arguable whether we need to do another one for a while, but that's a different story. But then on optic networks, you see an upgrade of network actually leads to a real world reduction in power. So you go from a kilowatt to 800 watts, and you at the same time go from a terabit to 10 terabit or 100 terabit or whatever scaling is. So it's if you don't invest in the business that's going to do that upgrade, you'll sit there forever burning a kilowatt at every node rather than 800 watts at every node. And so sometimes actually driving traffic onto the network drives the economic models, which allows you to build out more energy efficient infrastructure. The only way I can simply explain that is try to imagine how big EC2 would be, Amazon's cloud would be, if we were running on Pentium 2 processors.
Powered by coal.
It's terrible. I feel like I'm trying to sell cigarettes when I'm saying that, because it sounds like I'm trying to sell the industry's growth, and then you have a complex Jevons paradox where you breed efficiency and then everyone herds into the efficiency and you end up just depleting your resources anyway. So it's complicated.
Yeah, well, that is, I guess, also gets into that. I mean, there's people have said, it's not thrifty to hold on to your old petrol car. You get rid of the petrol car and you get an electric car.
Neal, sorry, can I just pick up on something that Dom touched on there?
Oh, sure, yeah.
The economic side of things, because that's another aspect that is changing. So, François talked earlier about AWS making these investments into clean energy and producing their own energy. The amount of energy that AWS is using, there's an economic kind of reality that if they can produce their own energy, their costs are going to go down as well as the costs of solar and as the availability of wind power, where they can generate that themselves. They're going to make huge economic savings as a business. So it would be naive to suggest that the only reason they're looking at doing that is because it's good for sustainability. There will absolutely be economic drivers. So as those things become more prevalent, as we are able to use more solar and make solar more efficient and more widely available, and wind power and all the other options there are, those things become really important. But equally, so does the infrastructure that you deliver that power on. And speaking in the UK, we've got a really old infrastructure that frankly isn't fit for the purpose that it needs to be. So that also requires huge investment so that you can then also optimize the sort of input and output of your energy through the network.
Just to give an order of scale, because sometimes these numbers are useful. The metro rail network in the UK, so in London, so the rail network inside the M25 uses about a terawatt of power, which is roughly equivalent to the UK, the BT's UK network. Just to give some sort of sense of scale to how much energy we use.
So another thing we haven't talked about is that I guess e-waste as well. That when we do upgrade all the servers, you do have a lot of e-waste. You have water issues as well. We don't have to sort of get into the nitty-gritty of all of those different things, but there are these sort of multiple things to consider. I wondered, what because we talk about the clue is in the name, the cloud, right? We talk about it as if it's the weather. It's like a thing that's happening to us, that's just natural force that we don't have any control over. It's just nature. But it is a thing created by actual people doing actual stuff, and actual businesses. So what is it that, I guess, what do we need to ask cloud companies to do, or if we could demand that cloud companies do to get them to be more sustainable, or to get them to be benefiting the future, because they have a tremendous amount of power, and so they, with a few tweaks, you could really get some traction in so many different areas.
So I'd just like to chip in there. It would be really good if the cloud companies would take ownership of the problem, rather than there's an increasing momentum in the hyperscalers to, I'd highlight it with Werner Engels, the Amazon, what is he, CEO, chairman, whatever,
CTO,
Amazon, CTO, the Amazon boss, commenting that cost is a proxy for sustainability. This is passing the problem down the supply chain and not taking ownership of the problem. And in trying to talk to anyone in a large company at the moment, the effort to move everything into scope 3 is quite large. Because once you put things into scope 3, you can essentially say the bit that I'm in control of is under control, therefore I'm net zero. And I think if there was net zero has become an unfortunate coat hanger for everyone to put sustainability on and say it's just gone down the supply chain. And so I would really like it if the clouds would set up service desks where people can ring up and ask engineering focused questions about what's going on with the infrastructure, so we can understand how what we do within their infrastructure really affects energy, rather than get something that's ultimately an accounting convenience for scoping and for reporting, rather than anything that I feel at an engineering level is something that I can ring up my SE at Amazon and say, how much energy did I just use on that server? That's an impossibility at the moment, and it shouldn't be, because the millions spent on reporting are a bit of a joke compared with the nothing that's spent on engineering research in this space. And that drives me crazy. The sort of experiments we're doing are costing tens of pounds and getting more real data than people who are doing millions on reporting and trying to create carbon accounting and models which are just totally disconnected to what I think is going on the shop floor. So ownership would be the one thing that I would like to see the hyperscalers do.
François, you've got this Werner, the CTO of Amazon, stuck in an elevator. What are you going to tell him?
I think we like to see more collaboration between all of them. Right? There's no standards as of today on how to report on these things. We know that things are going to go up. Definitely, there's not going to be less compute needed or storage needed. So what's the true impact? Well, we hope that there's going to be more, interesting projects that help with energy consumption, where we can also recycle things and reuse the heat that's being generated. I think this is all great for marketing, but definitely on the education and the research on how to make sure that we use resources more carefully. It's not because we're sending them in the cloud and into our scope 3 that the responsibility disappears. It's not all onto them. So hopefully there'll be more collaboration happening amongst them and also with the consumers. I'm not sure why we're not seeing things faster. I remember being in the same webinar about the same topic about a year ago, and the question was the same, right? Why are we not seeing more from them from transparency perspective? We know that they're sharing things, under NDA with big customers and some governments, but why not with the rest of us? There's something. Obviously, I'm trying to send a small signal here, but yeah, it's an interesting question.
It's good to practice these things, because once you do get them in the elevator, you want to be able to have that ready to go.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Mike, what do you think? What is there?
I think it's really just elaborating on what the guys have already said. It's ownership and transparency. I think Linda made a good point in the chat, where she said, that a lot of the data centers aren't actually owned by the cloud providers. Those are kind of facilities that they're leasing. So they're not necessarily always in control of the energy sources for that either. And that kind of stuff comes through because, as François just said, everything's about what do we put on our CSR statements and our annual reports and our marketing, as Dom's pointed out. So much money is spent on that. If you just took some of that money and invested it into the engineering and were just transparent and open and honest about the reality, because look, I'm not an AWS apologist at all, but I do have sympathy for them. For them to be able to tell me, we've got tens of thousands of productions every month using our stuff, and they will use a graphic for some part, for them to be able to tell me what energy that customer used and what the energy source was when we're using elastic compute across multiple servers in different territories, that is not an easy thing to do, but it's not impossible. If they actually, if you invest the money and resource into that, rather than marketing to say we're net zero, yay,
100%,
you get,
Mike,
you
I
get
totally.
there. So yeah, transparency and ownership.
Yeah, I mean, you figure there's that kind of what the cloud companies can do for us, but also as an industry, we've got a lot of influence, and we're kind of big customers for them. I don't know if we're as big as a lot of other sectors, but we do sort of punch above our weight in terms of influence generally. So what can the media industry do to kind of push change or affect change or encourage cloud companies? We can sort of ask questions, but is there anything that we could be doing ourselves that would be helpful or kind of accelerate things?
Neal, for me, I think you touched on it just there, where you say that we're not necessarily the biggest in terms of usage of cloud and AWS or all the other services. We're obviously big users. I don't know if we're the biggest, but we probably have the biggest voices, and the biggest exposure. And I think it's encouraging that you're starting to see things now where, the BBC are putting on their productions are Albert certified, just small things like that. If they grow and become louder, that's the way that you can actually build awareness and ultimately get viewers and consumers on board thinking, hang on a minute, that's actually really important to me, that I care about that. And so I want to learn more about it. I want to know more about it. And so then maybe, TV producers, maybe they can approach it and start doing more informative kind of content, creating more informative content to help educate people about it. Because, ultimately these providers are businesses and they want customers. And if they're kind of not delivering something their customers want, then they won't be as successful as businesses. So again, it kind of comes back to the economics of it. But I do think you're seeing more athletes who are becoming more vocal about these things. You're seeing more brands. People. I think because there's a lack of activity from a government perspective, then the onus kind of gets put more on people and businesses to do more. So if we can get past the marketing stuff and actually into actions and commitments, then I think that's one way that some of this can actually really make more progress.
I mean, actually, you mentioned sort of government. Do we need legislation? I mean, a lot of these things, require some legislation. If there is even just a threat of legislation, people are like, all right, and they scramble to get things done. I guess the problem might be like, what do you legislate? And I know Dom has spoken to this before, that the legislators aren't necessarily educated enough to take on some of these things.
No, sorry, Dom.
I'm sorry, Mike. Mike, go ahead, Mike. Say what were you?
I was just going to finish off and say that I think, without getting political, legislation is usually some way behind, the reality of the need in that, things need to happen now and very quickly. If you wait for legislation, it's 5-10 years down the road.
I was going to plug that we did a sponsored a webinar last week. There's sustainability expert series where we're looking at media policy issues and so on, and we've got some great legal minds who are right across what's going on across the landscape in media policy and highlighting the sustainability issues to us and so on. The CSRD, I can't remember what it stands for now, Common Sustainability Reporting Directive, I think it is now in action. Basically from I think it's March, you're going to, the largest companies are going to have to start creating some form of reporting infrastructure. It's a European directive.
That's Europe. Yeah, that's just in Europe. Right?
Yeah, so that's a European directive. It's got a sort of trickle down model, but the idea is the directive goes to each of the regional. Had Brexit not happened, it would have come to Ofcom, and Ofcom would have then looked at how to actually sort of implement that within its region. So that CSRD directive's gone out. So European companies and organisations are starting to think quite seriously about this reporting aspect of their quarterlies and their annual returns. And obviously, that's starting off with the big blue chips and the unicorns and trickling down to the SMEs over about 3 years and so on. So it's happening. And it'll come to the media industry at some point. But honestly, if the media conversations we've had with RCEP and with Beric and others over the year, we've highlighted what an insanely difficult thing it would be to actually put any really hard targets on any measures in this space at the moment, because it's too confusing to really be saying, if you do this, then systemically that happens across a global network or across a virtualized network or whatever it may be. So,
but you could say.
But it's coming.
Because I mean, you potentially, not this would happen, but you could mandate that every new data center has to be, zero carbon power or something. I mean, you could, something like that could theoretically happen. That could move things in the right direction.
Yeah, the problem is you can do that, but then you can load the data center onto the renewable mix. So if every data center moved to France, which has the most nuclear power and the lowest carbon mix at the moment, then everyone's balance sheets would look very green, but all the renewable energy would be used up, and France would probably have to fire up some coal-fired power stations to heat the homes again, which has happened in Germany. It's not an unrealistic situation. So it's really important to be good energy citizens, as well as just looking after your own internal, what you're doing in your data center. You can't just go, we're going to suck out all the renewable for our cat videos, that's insane. That would be suicide.
Right. That brings me to an AI question, but we're coming up on our hour when it's been an amazing talk. Let's open it up to questions. If there are any questions from our viewers, if you want to put them in the chat, great. Or I'm not sure if you can speak as well. You can try that.
We had a few interesting chats in the comments. Neal, go back. I think Linda and Mick have had to jump off to other appointments now, but they left. Yeah,
there are from just a few comments, and we can kind of look at them from Mick Broderick, who had to go. He said it would be great if every cloud facility took that altruistic approach to data center build, immersive cooling, feeding the local amenities, highlighting the E and S and ESG, whether they are global or small. I agree, it would. I mean, could we see data centers in the future that are public utilities, that are just like a public broadcaster, that are put together with the public good in mind, rather than allowing Jeff Bezos to buy another newspaper?
So I think that's possibly in reference to the article that Neal shared, which is about what's his name? Anyway, about Deep Green, which has been putting these micro data centers next to swimming pools. Exogistic systems have been around for about 15 years. Actually, there's been this very distributed data center model in Sweden, trying to put radiators into houses, and the radiator itself was a heat sink on the side of a computer. So, and I've seen other models which have been used for domestic water tank cooling and so on. And they've worked. There's pros and cons. There's a lot more truck roll in telecom speak, so there's a lot more getting in a car to go and maintain things in lots of places. That's one of the efficiencies of hyperscalers. You have robot arms changing hard drives when they fail, rather than cars driving to climbing someone's attic to do it. So you get these these offsets. But I think I do think that heat redistribution is a good target. I think immersion cooling itself can. I've seen examples where it seems that we're taking 40-50% of the heat out of the whole system, commensurately reducing the energy. of the data center. So I think immersion cooling's got a long way to come. At the moment, the oils that they're immersing in are still, not always, but quite commonly petrochem based. So there's still a fossil demand with those. And I think it's probably worth talking about a little bit about our project 4 with the ingredient streaming. So we've run these 4 lesser called projects, low energy sustainable streaming projects, because we're asking the same question: where should we start? So we asked the industry at the beginning of last year and got a gut instinct from as many engineers as we could, basically, and narrowed in on 4 key areas. One is trying to reduce the distribution peaks, the others are measurement and codec based, and the 4th one was all about hardware and this sort of the topic that Mick's sort of raised here. We were very inspired by a project which a company called Xatu did to move some servers into a wind turbine. They found out that you could house 90 servers in a wind turbine. And while I was looking at that, I decided to sort of put a wildcard plan together for Project 4. And we're starting to get some traction now, where there are quite a lot of heavy compute loads which are non-time critical. So AI training, video transcoding, these are kind of typically not time critical, even though they use a lot of data. So upgrading YouTube's back catalogue to the latest codec, adding whatever it may be, the flavour of the day for this year's codec, is a huge compute job, but it doesn't have to be done now. It can be done over a period of weeks or months. So what we discovered is the wind turbines typically produce about double the energy you can actually get off the wind turbine into any useful state, so that when the wind blows, there's about 50% waste. So you've wasted renewable energy, and it's difficult to get it from the wind turbine to the data center. So we reasoned that we could move the data center to the wind turbine, trickle the workload to the data to the wind turbines, process it and bring it back on wasted renewable energy. So we're not taking away from the grid of renewable energy, but we're capturing effectively heat loss in the wind turbines. And so, yeah, we're hoping we will get some support from a very windy country. I won't say any more right now, but a very windy country are looking at giving us a little bit of support to do a bit of a feasibility and maybe even a little pilot of that. And we're still looking for people who'd like to get involved. So, and the lesser called projects are open to non-members. So if that appeals because it's fun, then let me know, because I think that's quite a practical example of taking something would otherwise be in a very concentrated hyperscaler environment, producing a lot of heat. Well, actually, if we can distribute that across 20 wind turbines and have it done in a reasonable amount of time, but completely on wasted renewable energy, that would be quite a good thing.
So why is that energy wasted? What happens to it that it's not?
You basically, you can't get the high tension electricity cables to the turbines to take all the wind that they generate when the wind blows. So if you like, it's produced. If you like, it's, I don't know what a gigawatt rated. It's producing 2 gigawatts, but it has to burn off a gigawatt as heat locally or put it into batteries, which are very expensive and difficult to produce and maintain and so on. But actually, if you can stick a compute rack in there, when the wind blows, you can do your compute and just wait for the wind to blow.
Amazing. I mean, there are these, if you have, you've got compute and you've got your solar, you've got your wind, so you've got these sort of things laid out on the table, is there now an opportunity to kind of just put the Lego blocks together in different ways and better ways than you then have kind of just sort of naturally rolled out? I mean, are there just kind of building blocks that you can configure?
I think absolutely there is. I think it's been an easy job to add a column to the spreadsheet and go things like gigabytes equals kilograms of carbon equals pounds or dollars or whatever it may be. And so I think, the big accounting firms go, carbon accounting, let's just add a column. And how do we go from the gigabytes to pounds? We'll just do a carbon number there. And there we go. There's our sustainability metric, and the accounting's all done and off they go. And that's the depth of it at the moment. And I think that once you stop thinking about that and start going, what are the building blocks we've got here? How can we move a few services around? We're quite good at that as an industry, and we're quite a small industry. We're quite well networked. Good ideas take off quickly because we're good at communicating as well. typically.
Great. Another comment from Linda Taddick, who had to go, but she said most cloud providers, including AWS, Google, etc., are not operating in their own facilities where they can build and run on their own renewable energy resources. They're in co-load centers relying on the energy used by that co-lo facility. So they're co-located with other services. Is that what you're saying? Is that the case? I always thought that they were operating dedicated AWS or Google server, Google data centers.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the big unicorns these days working in colos. It's not my personal experience. I think there's a lot of intermediate operators and enterprises and telcos interconnecting in colos and things, but for security reasons, I don't think hyperscalers generally share facilities, in my experience. There might be at a very, very big level having a big facilities management company providing I can imagine an old school interaction or someone like that might have some secure rooms, but it's unusual, I think.
Yeah, so that maybe that question needs a little more looking at. So yeah, I mean, I think that's we've covered a tremendous amount of stuff there. Is there any last thoughts you want to leave us with that we should take with us to make sure that the cloud is sustainable in the next 10 years?
For me, I'm now totally just obsessed with the notion that if I want to use my computer, I've got to wait for the wind to blow. I love that concept. It's put in my head. The kind of I don't know.
Come and get involved with the project.
I'd love to, genuinely, but just the idea of
it is kind of it's like a sort of this natural process, like you're going sailing.
It
all comes back to nature. Forget the digital, we go analog. When the wind blows, then you can send your emails. Or whatever.
I think it's a good example of the right use case. You know, the original model which Zatu did was really just they moved some storage in there. It wasn't really a processing thing. But then the intermittence wasn't a problem because they had a battery farm. So they were just sort of exploring the space. But as I looked at it, I thought, God, if you just distributed that across 14,000 windmills across a country, that's a hell of a lot of data center space, which you don't have to build. And you've got power for a specific set of use cases.
There was a Spanish project that the Spanish university had done as well, which was a distributed computing sort of distributed compute setup that was basically a computer and a solar panel together basically, and somehow I can't quite remember how it was working or what the operation the operating mode of it was, but it was that you're generating solar power and using that solar power to power machines that would be machines that you would use in your home, but then would also be connected to other machines to have distributed computing, in a neighborhood or in a town or something like that. So again, like these different building blocks, that how you can kind of stick different things together and see what different utilities come out of them or different services come out of them, I think is really exciting.
I would say there's a lot of innovation in the space. I've been working with streaming for 30 years, and really between 2008 and 2018, it was just a very long, boring conversation about latency that no one really cared about. And sustainability does present a whole lot of really interesting engineering challenges once again. It's like going back to the 90s and playing with physical kit again. And, it's just cool.
And giving the engineers a project and say, see this number, you have to get below that number. Now go for it.
Yeah, 100%,
yeah. So, and Francois, any closing words?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the future. I think going back to the main conclusion for me is transparency. We just love numbers, we love data, we can't do anything without them. So I know there's CSRD or ESRS, whatever you want to call it, coming up. That's not going to change much to the bill, I think, imminently. I think it's just going to make companies understand that they should and they have to get their hands on more data. So hopefully that pressure will come from us as well, from a company perspective, because of these regulations. Being in the data, that's the conclusion to me.
Yeah, great. Tom, any final words?
Yeah, I think stop and think, separate attribution and consequence. That's a really important mantra for me at the moment. And make carbon part of the story, not the whole story. Because sustainability is so much more, and if you don't take an holistic view, you'll be trying to moderate something to do with one of the elements on the periodic table and how it relates to the atmosphere, rather than the holistic view of, you know, we mine huge amounts of rare earth materials to make data centers, and we produce tons of concrete using all the water. You know, we need to think about those things as much as we need to think about, you know, carbon. So I would just urge to include carbon, but as one of the big picture, as part of the bigger picture, because it'll make you think more clearly as an engineer.
And maybe head off problems in the future. Well, great. Thank you so much. I just want to remind everybody that the Flint has a weekly newsletter that you should all sign up for. Go to the Flint.media and sign up for the newsletter. Thank you so much, Dom, Mike, Francois, and we'll see you at the next Flint Forum in February. Thanks.